All right, folks. Hope y'all are having a good day. Welcome to the Writestream. It's the right place to be because it's the Writestream. I need to get a different boom arm that doesn't intrude on my visual space so much. But anyway, we are going to talk a little bit about the planning phase of creating a book. I should turn on the lava lamp. The better you do your planning phase in a book, the easier the draft will be for most people. Because you just follow the plan and you just execute. You get to focus on like writing good prose and writing sharp dialogue and not sitting around thinking like, I wonder what happens next. So at this time, let me just say that there's often two different kinds of writers that you'll experience in the fiction world. And probably in the nonfiction world as well, though, because I tend to come from a very academic background. I never think about just sitting down and writing nonfiction, like just beginning and writing. I have an idea for an article. I know what information is going to be in it and I write it. But for books, it's usually like you need a whole outline to know like what exactly you're doing and why. Give me 1 second. I got to close these blinds. They're gonna blind me because they're open. Okay, that's slightly better. Okay. So yeah, what were we talking about? We were talking about planning. So there's usually two kinds of writers that people talk about. Pants writers, people who write by the seat of their pants, aka gardeners is what George R.R. Martin calls them. He's a gardener, which is why people are still waiting for maybe the final 2 books of the Song of Ice and Fire series. You can kind of tell which side of the fence I would land on for whether you should be a quote pants writer or you should be a planner, right? An architect is what George R.R. Martin called him. So you can either plan or pants. You can be an architect or a gardener. I usually advise people to be the architect, and the main reason for that is that you can get things done easier. You never have writer's block because you've already decided everything about the story before you begin the drafting process. And this is obviously going to have a lot of advantages the bigger the book is. So the longer the book is, the more important it is to have some kind of coherent idea about how the whole thing is going to come together and how things are going to proceed so you don't get stuck and end up with writer's block and things like this. I did a video years ago on like how to get past writer's block. And what I kind of realized is most people get writer's block because they just don't know what happens next. So if you sit down and plan your story and you have a clear idea of the event sequence before you begin writing the book, that will make sure that you don't end up with writer's block. Because I was like, I don't really get writer's block a lot. And the only times I realized I've ever, quote, gotten writer's block was just, I just was pants writing and I just didn't know like what the next thing I was going to write was. Okay, so outlining is going to solve that a lot. That's the main thing, is how you plan a book. We're going to go over that because I think we can maybe outline a new story, since I finished up the, what did I call it, Sorcerer's Blood, and that's on Kindle Vela. I'll actually find that real quick for everybody, in case anybody wants to read it on Kindle Vela. Otherwise, you can actually read it on my Substack if you're a paid member of that, or on Patreon, I think, and Ko-Fi as well. So any of those will do. All right, but I'll link it. Maybe there's somebody that likes the Vela platform. Near as I could tell, there's pretty much nobody on the Vela platform. You know? So a couple people asked for planning. So I'll go over like how to start from zero and start filling in until you have a pretty good idea of what you're doing. Now, some people do more heavy outlining than what I tend to do. What I tend to do is I do a pretty just straightforward like event sequence, like almost like a treatment, like a screen treatment, like what George Lucas would do before writing a screenplay, like a one-page treatment of the story. Then I begin the drafting process and I only do the micro outlining, Like when I begin a chapter, I'm like, okay, for this next chapter, I'm going to have A, B, and C happen. And I might make a couple notes, this, because my work schedule might be erratic and I may only get to write that chapter like 3 separate days over 2 weeks, depending on how my schedule's going and all the other things that I'm doing all the time. So having that little note, this is the next thing that happens. I'm always thinking several steps ahead in the micro, and of course I have the macro to look at. I know where it's going. I know how the plot's going to resolve. So then when I get to that scene, I pants write the scene, but I know what's going to happen in the scene, and I know what I'm going for in any particular scene. I know the event. The event is the most important part when it comes to knowing what to write next. Other considerations come after that as far as getting the draft done. Things like theme or whatever, even character development. The event sequence is more important. Characters develop through the sequence of events in a book, so you don't have to set aside special scenes for characters to talk their way to developing. Rather, development usually happens as a response to something that's happening in the story. So that tends to happen kind of automatically. I actually have someone on Twitch, which is really rare. I don't know. I stream to Twitch just because I'm like, it's an option. Someone could watch me on Twitch if they want. Almost everybody's on YouTube. Same thing with like Facebook. Almost everybody's on YouTube. So, all right. The other part of planning is planning. I wanted to mention this. The other part of a planning phase when it comes to writing a book is how you're going to write it. Like, how you're going to schedule your time to write, how you're going to execute it in the practical real world. Like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write 2 hours a day is going to be the plan. The better you are at this, the more you can know how long it's going to take to make something. I'm going to rob something from software development that you'll hear about a lot. You can fix scope or you can fix time. Very difficult to do both unless you have a lot of experience so you know exactly how long it takes for you to write a certain amount of words, which to me varies, right? Like some days, 1,500 words comes out in 30 minutes. Sometimes it takes like an hour and a half to get 1,500 words. I try to write, if I'm actually doing drafting, I try to write 1,500 words because that's a good chunk. That's like a whole scene is usually 1,000 words. So, you know, 1,500 words. Sometimes it's more. Sometimes I write 5,000 words. It just depends like how easy it is, like how much knowledge I have of all the little details that are going to go into the scene before I start writing the scene. So planning how you're going to do it. Like I'm going to work at night. You know, people who've never done this or don't have their work habits established, you need to plan to have your work habits as well. If you're really good at this, like authors who are really experienced and just really are on top of all of the different phases, we'll be able to go, okay, I have an idea. I'm going to spend a day planning it. I'm going to spend this long writing it, and I'm going to revise it in this week and publish it at this date. I've done that before. So I did that with Needle Ash. I wrote all 3 of those books in November to like the first week of December. And then I published them all January 1st. So I knew it was like, okay, I'm going to finish it up here. It took me a couple extra days to finish it, but I was pretty close, right? I was a little bit behind schedule. I'm going to revise it this time, which I did, and I'm going to design all the covers, which I did, and then I'm going to release them on January 1st, which I did. So Needle Ash began on November 1st, and all 3 of the books were released January 1st, 2nd, 3rd of 2018, I think, 2018, 6 years ago. So yeah. So you could fix time or you could fix scope. So you have scope, which is like, how many features are you going to have? What's all the stuff the software is going to do? Okay, you're going to just develop the software to have all those features, and maybe you get it done in 6 months. Maybe it takes a year and a half. But you're going to have all those features. The other one you could fix is time. We are going to design software, and we need to have it out in 12 months. So you start cutting features at 10 months in because you can't get them out at 12 months. And that's okay. You just ship it with less features because you need to get it out in 12 months. So if you're developing a game, you could think of that as well. It's like on one side you have Star Citizen, and this is a fun way to think about it as well, right? Think of a couple different kinds of games. So you have a game that has a fixed time. it's going to cut levels, it's going to cut features to ship on time. That might be like Call of Duty or something like that. Call of Duty always ships on time. You notice that? Activision's very good at managing that production cycle and just knowing that like it's okay to not include everything. If you want to, you can sell it as DLC because they're like, well, just anything that doesn't hit that ship date of like November 1st, it's going to be in the map pack in March. You know, they're able to do that. It's fixed time. The other one is you could fix scope, right? We're going to develop Final Fantasy 16, and when it's done, it'll be done. Or like Final Fantasy 14, there was like a tentative release date for the last expansion, and then the developers were like, nope, it's going to take an extra 3 months because it's just not ready, right? It's not good enough. We want to have all these things in it, and so we're just going to make it take longer to get out, and that's great too. You know, that's great too. So yeah, Neil says he's a software developer, and that rings a bell. The worst thing you can do is Star Citizen. Star Citizen doesn't fix time, and it doesn't fix scope. So like theoretically, Star Citizen could never be finished. It could end up being never finished as long as we're alive, because there's no fix on the scope. There's no fix on the time. There's not even really like a fixed budget for this game. It's like 100. I don't remember how many. They're going to spend $1 billion on the game, and it's going to finally enter beta. And they'll release it with a plan for like 20 other content updates. I realize I still have the music going. I don't know if you guys can hear that on your end. I'll link the video. Where did I don't know where the video even is. I have too many windows open. Is this it? Yeah. If you guys are not subscribed to the music channel, you can subscribe to the music channel. No talking on that channel. So no talkie on that channel at all. Okay. All right, let's get into it, because we don't want to make a Star Citizen book. We don't want to have an unfixed scope and unfixed time, or you'll never be done. I think these are the people who end up doing their book for like 20, 30 years. And like, finally my book is done, and then they're like, no, it needs to be revised for another 8 years because it's 7,000 pages long. Okay. You need to doubt that. You need to fix the length a little bit more. Okay. Let's find a document. Maybe I could do like a little straw poll. I'm not sure what I should write next for like the live write stuff. If it should be Live in the Pod and Eat Bugs Part 2. The follow-up to that. Everyone wants a follow-up to Live in the Pod and Eat Bugs. I mostly wrote it as just an aphorism to like make fun of bug people, you know, make fun of modern life. But I had an idea for like a part 2 that might be fun, which would be like, you know, the main character meeting a porn star. He's never had sex and she's never enjoyed it. Only porn stars are allowed to have hair, you know. So that was kind of an idea there. And we could do something else. I always have like more ideas than I have time to really execute them properly. And you know, I don't know if people want more adventures with the last story I wrote. You know, I finally figured out my characters and their arcs, asking a ton of questions, but where I'm struggling is plot. Do I want this to be a standalone novel or 3 books that work on their own? Yeah, you're going to have to answer those questions before you start writing, hopefully. Yeah, you want to at least have those things figured out before you start writing. This is going to be 3 books. Like, one of the reasons that King Leper hasn't come out is that it's so long. It ended up being longer than I thought. I knew it would be long, but it ended up being even longer. Even though I had planned, like, I didn't add extra things I didn't plan. Everything that I planned is in the book. But what I realized is that whenever you add characters, you're adding little subplots and extra motivations. And those take up time. It takes time to like have moments with all of those characters. So because of the more extended cast of characters, it's just a longer book. And the book is long enough that I have to think about cutting stuff, like figuring out what I maybe don't need, which is really hard because I planned everything and I put everything in it. or volumizing the book. That is splitting it up like I did with Needle Ash into 3 smaller books, because we're kind of right at the edge for the maximum length a book can be, and be in the print on demand sphere, which is where I operate as an author. To get books that are more than 550 pages long, you have to do a lot of custom work. Like, you can get Brandon Sanderson and Stephen King books that are like 700 pages long. Like, they're out there. But they're not being printed by like Amazon with their like bound hardback stuff, right? So print on demand hardbacks, like I could get them done maybe through, I don't know, I'd have to research what printers will do 600 page books with 6x9, right? If I was trying to do it at 5.8 or 5x8, it just would be, now we got some Skyrim music. That's wonderful. If I was trying to do it at 5x8, it would just take, it would just take forever. I mean, you'd have to have everything be like 10-point font, or you'd have to split it up into 3 books, because you'd be at like 800 pages, 900 pages with like a paperback. It'd be so thick. It'd be doorstop. So yeah, that's a question that I have to think about now. Lord of the Rings was one book that was volumized, but because Needle Ash is kind of part 3 of a series, that I want to volumize. George R. R. Martin has had to volumize some of the books in Song of Ice and Fire, so I don't remember which one had to get split into 2 because it was so long. Dance with Dragons, maybe. It was very long, so you come up to the limits of like what a printer can do. It's okay. I got to make that decision at some point. I'm thinking I would rather have it be one like nice thick book. But then when it's one nice thick book, you also have to charge a lot for it because it's more expensive to print it. So instead of getting somebody hooked in with like, here's a 99-cent book 1 ebook, and then the next 2 are like $4.99, and you make, $8 worth of royalties maybe off the whole thing. It's like I have to sell one book for like $9.99 and maybe make less royalties, or fewer, less royalties. Anyway, yeah, you end up making the same or less for like the same thing. And then to make the hardback would end up being $25, $20 to $25, and that's pretty expensive. The Stand, it was a book I just didn't want to end. It fell into all the plot lines. I just wanted more. Funny story about The Stand. Maybe you know this, maybe you don't. So The Stand, Stephen King had to cut 100,000 words out of The Stand. The Stand, as a single volume, there's actually 3 books in it. It's kind of his Lord of the Rings, I guess. But he had to cut 100,000 words out of it because it was too big to print. So the publisher gave him the option, we'll edit it or you can edit it. And so he chose to edit it. Modern editions have those extra words in it. It's like 100 or 110,000 extra words, which is huge. That's a whole book on its own. But the original versions of The Stand were shorter because their publisher, it would have been so much more expensive to try to print the book at 1,000 or 1,200 pages that they had to do something else. They had to cut it down to like 800 pages. It's a really long book. So yeah, he had to cut 100. So if you find an early edition of The Stand, it'll have a lot less out of it. It's got a different ending and a different beginning, I think, as well, in order to try to focus the story. But I think the full version that you get now is probably the best one. Last I saw, if you wanted to buy a hardback of that, it's like $50. It's expensive because it's like buying all 3 Lord of the Rings books as one book. I think the total length of the book is over 500,000 words. Really long. King Leper, meanwhile, is, I don't remember how long it is. I think it's less than 200,000. So it's not nearly as long. That's still really long, though. That's as long as like I don't know. I'm trying to think of a book that's around that. It's as long as a typical long Stephen King book. It's an epic story, though. It's a long story, so yeah. That's what you get. All right. So let's let me pull up like a blank document, and we'll talk about like how you want to plan. So planning is not nearly as complicated as some people want to make it out to be. A lot of people, when they are thinking planning, they're thinking, okay, well, I have to like plan every scene. How do I start that? So we're going to start with the big three things: setting, characters, and plot. So if we're going to make a new story, we need a setting, we need a list of characters, and we need a plot. This is an event sequence. Now, for the event sequence to make sense, you have to have a conflict. What is a conflict? A conflict is a problem that must be solved. Who's going to solve it? Well, the protagonist, right? The characters are going to solve it. You don't have to have one protagonist. You don't have to follow these rules, but these are the things that you would probably need in order to begin work on your book. So setting is where it takes place and when it takes place. You should have an idea of that. Make a list of characters, maybe a protagonist, maybe an antagonist if that's what you want to go for. The protagonist wants to solve the problem. The antagonist doesn't want him to solve the problem. Conversely, you could have a protagonist trying to stop the antagonist from solving a problem, which seems weird. It really just turns, it's like Empire Strikes Back. The protagonist, the person trying to solve a problem, is just the villain in that case, right? So like Darth Vader would be the protagonist of Empire Strikes Back more than Luke, right? Luke is reacting, and then Darth Vader is acting. So it's kind of an interesting way of thinking about that plot. Okay, so once you have those things, then you come up with the event sequence. So for the way that you would outline an event sequence would be, you need to introduce the conflict. How are you going to introduce the conflict? And who's going to be involved? What characters are going to be involved in the introduction of that conflict? You need a reason for the characters to do what they're doing. So if the protagonist is going to solve the problem, he has to have a reason for that problem to be solved. He's going to get a reward, or the outcome is something he cares about. Like if it's a war, he's a freedom fighter. Conflicts can be really big. They can be like, we have to destroy the Ring of Power, or it can be really small. Like, I have to get Marcia to go with me to the prom. There's nothing that says conflicts have to be big or they have to be epic or anything like that. They can be whatever they need to be for the story. You can have a story that's like, boy has to get girl to go out with him. You can have a story like, boy's going out with girl, but she's bad for him, so how do we break them up? Like Saving Silverman. All right, there's many different ways to approach a conflict, and what characters are going to have a stake in that conflict. So the easiest way for a protagonist to have a stake in the conflict, or to have a reason to solve the conflict, is he has a stake in the outcome. So his mother is sick. He has to go find medicine for her. Why? He cares about his mother. Okay, so it's a really simple way of doing that. So let's make a dummy one. We can make like a really easy like dummy setting. The setting is we're gonna have let's call it medieval fantasy, right? I'm just gonna write it down, medieval fantasy, and we need a list of characters. And at this point, you can decide. We'll talk about some ways to think of plot as we plan as well, like an A and a B and a C story. You don't have to have A, B, C story. You can just have one main plot. Is there a name, or do you know an example of a story with one bad guy introduced, dealt with, and then the next, kind of like video game bosses at the end of the stage level? I'd have to think about it. Never-ending Story has that. What else? Yeah, I'm sure there's some. Revenge of the Sith has that. You kill the general halfway through, and then there's a whole extra act to the movie. So, yep, all that kind of stuff. So, Running Man. Yeah, maybe Running Man. Yeah, there's some. It just means that like you defeat the villain, but it hasn't solved the conflict, and that happens as well. Oh, there's really a bigger boss at the end, like Final Fantasy 2. So games tend to do that, right? Is like you think you're solving the problem with You think you're solving the problem by beating the boss, but there's always another boss. So let's do medieval fantasy. So one of the things about characters is like we can just come up with some names that we like, whatever names you think are fun. Maybe give me some names in chat and I'll put them in here. Aren't there 7 types of plot? I've never heard that. I would never limit it to 7. There are many kinds of plots. So there's many kinds of plots and many kinds of conflicts. People that write a lot of writing manuals want you to think in terms of categories because that's how they sell books, and that's how a lot of people start to absorb information, is by thinking in limited categories. Once you get past a certain point, though, like those don't really make sense because there's so many different areas of emphasis that can happen with a book. Plugging everything into a formula. Why don't you just have an AI write it? At this point, you realize that you can have 2 things that are, quote, the same, and they're radically different quality, different feelings result from them. They're experienced differently by readers. Yeah, I wouldn't rope things into like those kinds of categories. I remember reading, was it Save the Cat? I really need to do like a whole thing on Save the Cat because I really hate Save the Cat. It gives you all these dumb categories for like what movies are supposed to be, and when you read it, you're like, it's so prescriptive to try to cram every movie into these dumb categories. After a while, you're like, oh, this is like Monster in the Attic, and you're like, it's not. Like, it doesn't fit that. It's stories can be original. Stories can be unique, okay? So, anyway, let's come up with some characters. I'm going to come up with one that is, do we want it to be a boy or a girl? I don't know. I feel like the last one I wrote had a male character, so we can do like I hate doing like teenage girls. Like, it's such a young adult thing, but maybe actually before we even do this, like let's think about our genre. And if you're thinking about genre, you're going to think about the tropes of your genre. You're going to think about the setting types of your genre. And you're going to think about the conflict types that tend to happen with the genre. This is all reader expectations. So if you're writing to market, which I don't really do, I write the crap that I want to write. And I actually don't really care sometimes if people read it or not. I just kind of like to see what people are doing. I think it's really hard to be artistic thinking too heavily about the way genres work, because then you won't do anything original. You start writing too much to market, and then you might as well just have an AI write it. So if you're doing young adult, what's the standard young adult trope? Because people say young adult, but what they really mean by young adult is young female. So if you're writing for a young female audience, who does the protagonist tend to be? It tends to be a teenage girl, right? So a teenage girl. Then you're going to have 2 to 3 boys interested in the teenage girl, and her conflict. This will be the B story. So the A story will have some kind of fantasy conflict. B story will be which hot boy do I choose? So it's like a romance plot. And then your C story will usually be some other thing, like I have a conflict with my dad. Right? So like Twilight Book 2, like which hot guy do I pick and how do I fix the relationship with my dad? And oh yeah, someone wants to kill me maybe, and that has to be fixed. The other kind of stuff is kind of in the background. It's in the background of what you're doing. Whenever I see the name Cedric, I always think of Cedric the dog from James Harriet's All Creatures and Great and Small. I think of Cedric the Entertainer. It's originally pronounced Kedrick. It's a Celtic name, Kedrick, right? What about a story from an inanimate object or object's point of view? Is that possible? Someone asked me this on Twitter. It's like, why would you want to? You can do that. Yeah, try it. Someone did like the Dream of the Rood, right? Dream of the Rood exists. That's about like being from the perspective of Christ's cross. You know what I mean? So, yeah, there's different ways of doing it. Why do they mean young female when saying young adults? It's just who ends up reading them more. If we're talking about teenage boys are doing different things. They're playing video games or they're reading just adult fiction. They don't read a lot of young adult fiction. Some is targeted towards teenage boys. But if we go look at all the young adult categories, they're all subcategories of regular genres. You'll find that it's really targeting a female audience. Maybe that's bad, maybe that's good. I'm not going to make a judgment about it. It's kind of like there is a genre called chicklet. Not like chicklet, not like gum. Chicklet. It's called chicklet, like chick literature. And chick literature is basically romantic comedy stuff, right? Like Pride and Prejudice, but modern. I've met several women who are like, I'm offended by that. I'm like, I didn't make up the name. I didn't make up chicklet. It's not mine. I didn't make that up. But it has certain tropes. It'd be like a romantic comedy. So there's certain kinds of conflict and plot you're going to see depending on where you want to emphasize it. If we're just thinking like, I don't know, just standard medieval fantasy, it's probably going to be a male character. So fantasy with a male point of view character, that tends to be more adult oriented, and it's not good it's not a good or bad thing, but it's just something you see more commonly is a male protagonist. And maybe it's because there tends to be a medieval setting, and men being more physical are going to be doing more pro-tagging unless you're doing like political intrigue kind of stuff. Like there's definitely female protagonists in Game of Thrones, but they're not like chopping people's heads off and having duels. They're like manipulating men to do that. So women tend to do different things. Even if you're reading Brandon Sanderson, if you're reading like Stormlight Archive and there's magic, it's still, you notice that the men are the ones doing most of the physical stuff. The men are the ones chopping the heads off. Men are the ones fighting the giant bugs and having their shard blades and all that kind of crap. And the women are mostly doing manipulative stuff. They're manipulating each other and the men into doing things. This might be like, this might be a point of criticism for the way men write women. This is exactly what Robert Jordan did in Wheel of Time. The women, who are all mages, like all the Aes Sedai have magic, but they spend most of their time manipulating men into doing things. So what does it say? Like, what does it say about your female characters or your view of women? That like the main way that they act is by manipulating, in some ways, like through sex and all kinds of stuff, manipulating men into doing doing the pro-tagging. It's an interesting way to think about it. I actually avoided that when I wrote Water of Awakening. This has a female protagonist, right? Helga. Now she is kind of a firebrand, kind of a fiery character, but she's definitely a woman. And there are physical limitations she has, but she's not one who executes her goals. She chooses to try to execute her goals herself and suffers for it, rather than trying to manipulate men into doing what she wants to do. That's a big distinction with that character versus what Robert Jordan would write. I was more inspired by the women who were sidekicks to Conan, right? Thieves and stuff. They weren't manipulating Conan into doing things. They were just adventuring with him. It's a little more interesting to me. I pull my braid. A Nynaeve tugging her braid every other page. Would it be a dumb idea to have a story about a pair of shoes, left and right, having different personalities, and they move through? I don't know. Someone did the movie. What was that movie about? What if food had feelings? It was pretty bad. In reality, that's what they do to gain influence and power. Just how men and women differ. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's what authors tend to do, because if you come up with a conflict that's like, someone's going to kill us, that's the conflict. Women have a hard time solving that just by themselves, because the men coming to kill them are bigger and stronger than them. So naturally, it's going to be men who are going to solve that problem. So how do you insert women in that conflict? You're like, well, we'll have them manipulate the men into doing it, rather than having a conflict that's more focused towards what women can do, which is what you're going to find more of in chick lit, actually, and things like Jane Austen books. Now there is people trying to manipulate each other in Jane Austen books, make no mistake, but it's more like the problems that women are trying to solve are social problems, not like I need to get this guy to kill this other guy. This is like a really funny fantasy thing, like in Game of Thrones. I'm a female character. How do I get a man to kill another man that I don't like? How do I get a man to kill a woman I don't like? I don't know, it's a funny thing. One of these funny things about it, As a discovery writer, this live stream will be what Hollywood movies to vampires. Okay, yeah. I pulled my brain. A young female adventurer gets stuck with taking in supporting an 80-year-old version of Geralt who stays at home by the figure and complains, gives world lore advice. Yeah. Have you heard of battle couples? Vanderwolf talks about them sometimes. It's essentially a romantic couple that fights villains together, like Rick and Envy from the Mummy movies. Yeah, you can have those. There's some in my books. There are some in my books, so I do use them. I think it's why in fantasy physics and physiology is to ignore, so women can do what men can do instead of what would actually happen. Yeah, I mean, and this actually makes sense for a lot of things. If you read something like Malazan Book of the Fallen, you find that they just do that, except sometimes he conveniently makes it so women can't do what men do. Otherwise, like women are just doing what men do all the time, unless he needs them to be weaker than men, in which case they are for that moment. If they need to be raped, then they're unable to resist, even though they're in the army fighting alongside men, right? You get the idea. Like, it's not super consistent. But it makes sense for something like World of Warcraft, because your character is just mostly an aesthetic choice, especially at this point. And in Final Fantasy, it's very much an aesthetic choice. If you want to play a pretty character, you just want to play the game, right? You want to play a game and you want to look at a pretty character. That's why most of my characters are female. It's not so. I mean, it's funny how long this has been around. It's like, are you trans because your Final Fantasy character was a girl? It's like, no, that's not me. That's just a character walking around on the screen that I'm controlling. It's obviously not me. But I find the female form more attractive naturally. So it just depends how you want to interact with that character. Anyway, so let's take a look at this. So we'll do medieval fantasy. I'm going to come up with a male character. Let's not do... I don't know what to name him. Let me think of some cool, like... We'll just call him Alfred. Like Alfred the Great. We'll have Alfred. We'll come up with another character like... let's do all like English kings. Edward. Alfred, Edward... And I want to think I like some early English kings, like some Mercian kings. I'm trying to think of some. We'll start with Alfred and Edward, and then we'll have like a romantic interest. So Alfred is going to be the protagonist. Edward is going to be the antagonist. Be Athelready. All right, let's do that. Athelready. I'm not sure if I'm spelling his name right, but that's like an old English name. Kind of get that dynamic with Gotrek and Felix. Oh wait, why not a male character who's so pretty no one can take him seriously? Yeah, anyway. Athelready. And he's going to be like, we're going to have to call him the best friend. And we need a romantic interest. Let's think of a good girl's name. We'll just call her Victoria. That's going to be our love interest. those are the 4 basic characters we really need to start with. And we can add characters as we go. So what's our conflict? So our conflict is going to be, honestly, it could be anything. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So it's a little bigger on y'all's screen. Okay. Let's think of a good fantasy conflict. Could be a dragon that needs to be slayed. Could be, could be you have to stop something bad from happening. Well, let's think. Oh, let's think of a really classic one. Alfred is the, we're going to make him the rightful heir to the throne. We'll do Arthurian thing. Edward, the antagonist. We could make him his twin brother. Let's make him Alfred's cousin. Athelred is the best friend of Alfred. Victoria's the love interest. You can be getting really crazy and you can make it Edward's sister. They're cousins, but, you know, that might be a little too weird. That would be kind of standard in medieval fare, though, you know. Would outlining the screenplay be the same as outlining a book? In this case, for what I'm doing, yes. It's pretty much exactly the same. With screenplays, you're a lot more limited on time. You don't want to write for most, if you're trying to get it produced by someone else, you have to keep in mind the constraints of the format you're using. A 2-hour movie is 120 pages in Final Draft Pro. Okay. So if it's over 120 pages, you're now in the territory of your screenplay is probably too long to produce unless you are self-producing it, in which case you can make it as long as you want. Right? So 2 hours, 120 pages is what you want to limit it to. If you have a standard like ABC story, then it's not that hard. So the A story is Alfred needs to prove that he's actually the king. And how's he going to do that? You know, you could do a sword in the stone kind of thing. You know, let's do he needs to go on a quest to like get something to prove that he's the king. It could be anything. I'm not going to write this story, so I'm just giving you examples of like, what's the problem? So that's a problem. This is the A story. And then you can come up with little sub things here, right? He's going to get a sword that kills all who touch it, you know, except those of the true blood, let's say, like called like the dragon blood. You have him be like a descendant of dragons or something fun like that. B story is usually the romance. Alfred needs to convince Victoria to marry him. In some cases, you can have the A story be a solution to B story. She only, or maybe her father. Her father will only allow it, you know. If he is king. You could come up with something crazier too, like she's already betrothed. She's betrothed to Edward. And then you could come up with events that are going to be important for the B story. And then the C story is usually the best friend story. Athelred, what's his problem? You know, Athelred is going to obviously help Alfred, but Athelred has something else that's going on too, which is like, it could be anything, you know. He has to prove that like he's good enough to be lord of whatever. Doesn't matter. How many characters is optimal? There's no optimal. There's no such thing as optimal. It depends how long a book you're writing, how much space you have to develop those characters, and what those characters are doing. I've had books that you need like a whole list of characters because there's so many. Other books that it's like Voices of the Void has literally 2 characters in it. That's it, and it could have just had 1. Eyes in the Walls has like 5, but there's major and minor characters. How much of a focus did they get? Bert the Innkeeper is a character, but if he's only in one scene, he's not that much of an important one. Think of like Lord of the Rings. There's like main important characters where there's like 10 of those, and then there's like lots of characters they meet on the way, right? They meet Butterbur. Is that his name? Barlaam Butterbur, the innkeeper, right? He's in at the side of the prancing pony. He's in like 1.5 chapters. Not that important a character. He's important for that chapter, but it's like, do I have to cut him because I have too many characters? No, he's not like a main character, So it doesn't, like, he's just there for part of the story. He's a static character, what we call a static character. He doesn't really change. He's just his own thing. He's not a main character. My book, I'm aiming for a 5-man band, a team of heroes who've had their own unique roles. If I use some of my books as an example, like we have in Needle Ash, you have one main protagonist in Michael. You have his romantic interest who also does a lot of the pro-tagging with him. That's Sharona. They're the ones who like occupy the meat of the story. There's a bunch of other ones. There's Angelico, his best friend. There is what's his name? There's Guy, who's like his other kind of best friend, his advisor. His friend from the castle. There is his brother, who is kind of the antagonist. There's his father, Eduardo the Black, who gets murdered, right? He's not a big-time protagonist. He's only in a couple of scenes. But he's important because he kind of sets the plot in motion with like the murder and stuff. There's the Queen of Ferala. She's a character. Not in a whole lot of scenes, though, right? So most of it, the weight of it is on the A and the B story between Michael and Sharona. And then there's kind of a C story with Angelico helping his friend. So Athelredy, you can have a light C story. He wants to help Alfred, but he can't get his inheritance, to buy a horse, for example, right? He's technically a knight, but he can't get an advance on his inheritance to buy a horse. That's his conflict, and so Alfred can help him solve that, and then in turn, Athelredy can help Alfred solve his problem. At the end, come in and save him at the end. So we have an A, B, and C story. This is the beginning of an outline. Then from there, we need like an event sequence for whatever we're going to do, which is, event 1 is going to be like Alfred's father disappears and is presumed dead. Since he is a boy, Edward, his older cousin, becomes regent. Regent is like, ruling in his stead. Edward is a tyrant who oppresses the people. Edward sends Alfred to a tower to be imprisoned. On the way, he escapes. Maybe we can have in here that Athelredy also gets brought with him. He's captured by, just coincidence. This is a pretty standard kind of fantasy story of like, rightful king kind of story. It's been done a bunch of times. Athelredy would be, how am I spelling? Athelredy would be like the comic relief character. Yeah, I would probably put that in there. Yeah, we introduce. So this is the A story. We have a conflict here where Edward is going to actively stop him from becoming a king. So after they escape, they find their way to a rural castle where they meet Victoria, who helps them not because she knows Alfred is king, but because she thinks they are convicts and is excited by the prospect of adventure. So what trope are we working with here? Victoria. Let's go up and chafed by being a shut-in and only getting to read books. And never do anything interesting or fun. This is not a particularly interesting outline in here, but this is our event sequence. Okay, so we have, this is, I can label this as all A. You can do colors or whatever you want. This is obviously going to be B. Their merry little band is going to go on this quest because Victoria, who reads a lot, knows of Alfred's father's sword, which will kill any man who touches it. Alfred doesn't really believe this, but he does remember how beautiful the sword was. Victoria runs away with them to find the sword. Okay, so now we have a solution to the A story, right? Now she's running away because she's bored, basically, which is a little bit different. It's a very tired trope. It's very tired, like it's been done to death, but it'll work for what I'm doing here. Yeah. In the plot, can the romance develop later? Yeah. You want to kind of introduce it, and the romance develops kind of as you go. Again, these are broad, and then you can add sub points to each of these things. Like scene 1, this happens. Scene 2, this happens. And you eventually, some people make an outline that's really thorough, where every chapter has a certain number of scenes with an idea of how many words are going to be in every scene. I don't go that detailed, but with a little bit of experience, you might be able to. Went to the mountains with two of yeah. we're gonna add a little bit of detail here. Alfred's mother is very ill. We're going to make it extra tragic. She dies. She gets sick and dies. Went to the mountains, went west. You know, then you have a plot. You know, they sneak back to the capital, where they look up all the men who used to work at the castle. They find the old steward. He calls Alfred's father a fool because he had set out to find a cure for his wife. All right, so he went off on a noble quest, right? So you can start filling in the details here. Okay, pretty simple. Of course, Victoria knows about this. She's kind of the goody two shoes of the, not really the goody two shoes because she wants to break a lot of rules, but she's kind of like the bookworm of the bunch, right? So you have each character has a trait. Alfred is maybe very brave. He's kind of the everyman, even though he's a king. Athelred would be like your comic relief character, like your Ron Weasley sort of character, and then Victoria is more like Hermione, if you want to do like Harry Potter terms, right? Victoria is more like the love interest, but also kind of the smart one, the one who provides educational solutions to problems, whereas Athelred will provide almost nothing until the end, when he will save everybody with like his something good about himself, right? That's how I would set this up. Oh, super chat. I missed the super chat. $5. Thank you. Would each character have priorities and personal values? Yes. Depending on whether it complements or conflicts with each other, manifest plot points. So the plot points really have to do with there's a goal and you have obstacles towards that goal, and then you have ways that you're going to overcome those obstacles. So you notice this is all mostly A story for this. The B story would be how is Alfred going to get Victoria to actually like him, so that's an obstacle. You have to overcome it. In that case, Athelred might be very cowardly, so he has to do something very brave to overcome things, or maybe he's foolhardy. So let's make, because what's more comic-y, Sir Robin or Sir Lancelot from like Monty Python? I think Sir Rob, I think they're both really funny, but I think for Athelred, he'd be foolhardy. So we can write down some traits. Alfred. Athelred, comic relief. Foolhardy. Careful and cunning. Personable. Very evil. Sadistic. Hates puppies. Whatever it is. Love interest. Bookworm. Intelligent, but oblivious to real danger. Yeah, this would be a good little story. Speaking of fantasy, I watched Willow for the first time. Good A and B stories. I loved Willow. Yeah. Willow was great. Yeah, so what's the priority and the values, right? It's like Victoria's bored and wants excitement. She wants a life of adventure that she's read about in books. But of course, she's oblivious to real danger. She has no idea that the things that are in the books are actually really, really, really dangerous. Whereas Alfred understands these things, and so he gets her and Athelready kind of out of trouble because they're rather foolhardy with what they do, right? So as we were writing, I would start to come up with scene ideas that would get these ideas to get this stuff across, right? Like sneaking back into the Capitol, there you'd have a sequence where Athelready would come up with a really bad plan, or Victoria would come up with a really bad plan, and Athelready would like jump to do it, and they would both almost get killed because of their stupid idea, and Alfred has to save them both because he's like the street smart guy. Okay, so you'd have a scene where something like that would happen, and you can plot that out. But for now, we're just trying to get the big stuff, right? Victoria knows about this. She knows where it is. They steal a map from the castle. This could be a whole like crazy sequence, right? There'd be a whole chapter of wackiness. While sneaking through the castle, they overhear Edward discussing maybe his mom isn't died. Maybe his mother has slipped into a coma. Notice I'm just changing we haven't written anything yet, so we can change as much crap as we want. How to discussing Alfred's mother. So we have an extra reason. Alfred has to save his mom as well. So now we're kind of raising the stakes. That'll be a raise the stakes moment. Okay. You know, with the map, they set out to find, you know, Alfred's father and the cure. That's a good little story. Then you can have some events, right? However many obstacles you want to put in front of that. This is a really good format for like an Odyssey at this point. What would an Odyssey be? An Odyssey is you know, each chapter is a different area where something happens. So any kind of quest where like characters have to go away to get something and maybe come back there and back again, you can have just any adventures you want, any fun things that you want to think about can happen here, and you can use those to develop the characters, to develop them, right? So think of like the, you know, there could be something that tempts Athelready. Maybe it's like treasure. There's some kind of treasure that tempts him. Are they going to stop and get the treasure? Because that would solve his problem. Because his family's actually super poor, even though he's like a noble. So let's do that. I'm really foolhardy. A noble knight, squire, but secretly very poor. His conflict is he needs money. Go to the mountains, you know. Maybe they come across a group of bandits. They overhear them talking about a treasure trove at the bottom of a ravine in the water. I think C.S. Lewis did something like this. He decides to try to get the treasure because he's poor. because he's poor, right? He won't listen to Victoria, who warns him that there's a reason no one has the treasure yet. He calls her paranoia, result of reading too many books, right? This romance would be naturally ironic. Yeah, I get what you mean. So totally, yeah. Like the different, going back to the super chat, the different traits that a character is going to have are going to cause conflicts with other characters, even if they're on the same side and they have mutual goals, right? And those conflicts will create some of those little subplots, you know? So like Han and Leia, opposites attract kind of thing, right? So friction between your protagonist and the love interest, that's actually a really good writing technique. And I actually think that tends to work out pretty good, you know? So you have a little friction between, say, between Victoria and Alfred in this case. Victoria initially chases after Already, but Athelruddy will be killed for sure. Now, I could make all of this. This would be like a, you know, we can call this like Adventure 1, right? So we're kind of in Adventure 1 territory right here. Adventure 1, okay. So this would all be like, you know, exposition. This would be inciting incident. Call it that if you want. This is going to be transition 1, which is where we introduce the B story. You know, this would be adventure 1. So you can write as many of these little adventures as you would want for something like this. To like put a little obstacle in front of them, get them closer, get them to know each other better, yada, 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 on down the line. Whoops. Yeah. What keyboard are you using and why? This is a Ducky. The switches are Cherry MX Blue switches. I don't know the name. The Ducky 1? It's called the 1-2. As dumb as that sounds. ONE number 2. The Ducky 1-2. It looks like this. With my green and purple. You can't see it, but my PC's all green and purple too. Like all the LEDs are green and purple. It's like my thing. I have a green and purple guitar. I got green guitars, purple. Green and purple's like, I like green and purple. They're complementary colors, by the way. Not really. No. Yellow and purple are complementary. What the hell am I talking about? Green and purple are not. They share blue. But I like them. The plot genie was a spinner that would pick random numbers corresponding to one of thousands of plot points. Some 1930s to 40s pulp writers and screenwriters used it for outlining. Yeah, I wouldn't use it simply because I like things to be the result of my own like heart and not just I need to make a product. How do I make a product real quick? This is why. Whoa, kitty. Oh, you woke up. Hey, bud. All right. I'm in the middle of something. You do, huh? Well, come here. Yeah. All right. This is the cat that hugs. It's an old cat. Sometimes he's a little senile. All right. This is Simba. Simba the cat. Likes to hug. He's a very sweet old cat. Okay. All right. You wanting to go eat or something? We'll do that. Go on. Go. Go get Ron or something. Ron is. I hear Ron doing something. Go play with him. All right. Sorry. Yeah. I think this story's romance is dependent on how many books and which ones were impactful on the female characters read. Yeah. Well, we conjure up whatever we need for the story. We don't have to decide that ahead of time. We can just write the plot and be like, oh, Victoria knows this from a book, just like how Hermione's read every book, right? It's just the bookworm trope. She just knows stuff. Whatever you need. All right. They finally make their way to the spot. And at first think that Athelred is dead. Because they see a corpse in the water. Alfred holds Victoria back again. The bandits appear. And they try several things to get the gold. Or get the, maybe there's a chest. It won't budge. They draw straws, and one bandit goes in to get the chest. He immediately gets pulled under the water and disappears. Athelred, he finds Victoria and he just says, you know, so anyway, there's our first adventure, adventure 1. So you can have as many of these little adventures as you want before you get there. Eventually what you want to have, you know, this is an example. This is more like micro. To me, this is a lot more micro than what I would normally do. We can have another one where, you know, maybe they find a witch. They find a witch. Where the cure is. You know, she deceives them. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, they find a witch that tells them where the cure is. Maybe there's an exchange, is what I like better. Because this is something from like Black Cauldron. You just you can use this sort of plot point for Black Cauldron, you know. You know, it has to be what matters the most in the world to them. So this is a good like fairy tale thing, right? What does Alfred have to give up? He has to give up Victoria. What does Athelred have to give up? He has to give up money. Maybe he has treasure. Maybe they get treasure. And then have another adventure where he gets treasure. He has to give up his money, right? And what does Alfred have to give up in order to go further, right? He has to give up his or he has to give up Victoria maybe, or his kingdom, or something like that. I think it's better if he gives up Victoria, and then they find the sword when they give things up. You know, maybe there's like a fountain inside a cave. Find the fountain. They find Alfred's father alone. Maybe it's a cave. You know. Me, Alfred. I mean, Athelred gives up his money. What does Victoria give up? She's going to give up what? Adventure? Victoria is mad. And we can worry about that execution later. I'll probably never write this, but I'm just showing you how I would outline stuff. So we have like all of these little event sequences here. This would be sort of the, we would call this the, you know, the final act. This might also be like the, I don't know, depending on what you're looking at. Some people call it like, you know, the plot point 3 or like pinch point 3, depending on what plot format you're working. I'm not working with any plot format. This would be an Odyssey, so I would have like a bunch of these adventures, and they would pick up important things on the adventure that they think that they would use, and then they have to give them all up at the end. His father alone. He gave up his kingdom. He tested the water. You know. You get the water. You know, Alfred's father's not going to leave. You could have a really good twist here where like Alfred's father is the spouse of the witch or something now. You know. What's the reason for using mechanical keyboard? I'm on my way to buy one, but not sure if it's worth it or not. Well, first of all, it provides a much more tactile response to you actually pressing the key. So you're really positively sure that you've pressed the key. That's why I use blue switches and I don't use red. Red are quieter, but there's less, when you push a key all the way down, like I'll just do some here, like when I push a key all the way down, there's this really positive feeling that you've pressed the key. So it increases accuracy quite a bit for me. I know when I've pressed the key. Right, so it's the tactile feel of it. That's the main reason, is to make you more connected to the keyboard when you type. There's different kinds of switches though, so you can try those out. I use blue switches. I've always used blue switches. I've always preferred them. I've had other switches. But this keyboard is replacing a DOS keyboard that I had for years and actually wore out. So yeah, I had a DOS keyboard, DOS keyboard. They're kind of a premium brand, but I bought it, I think I bought it in 2014. And I wore it out in about 8 years. Took me about 8 years to wear it out. So by wear it out, I mean the keys, the switches were physically breaking down and breaking apart at that point. Right. I had typed probably 20 books on it and countless other things and played games on it. I prefer an ergonomic keyboard. They have ergonomic keyboards with switches too. I figured out for me, most quote ergonomics really have to do with wrist angle, like whether most people are typing like this, and it doesn't really have to do with this angle at all, for me at least. Like my wrists are completely straight when I type on a keyboard. You can't see it. I've done some videos on it. But some people when they type, their wrists are like this, kind of like pointed outward. Mine are completely in line, and the top part of the wrist is straight. I learned this from playing piano, playing guitar. That's how you avoid injuries. I have yet to have a repetitive stress injury in either of my hands from typing or from playing guitar. And I never got one playing guitar eight hours a day. So, everybody's body's different though, but I learned the ergonomics. If your wrists are straight and the top part of your wrist is straight, you guys can't see me that good because I'm very little. The top part of your wrist is straight when you type, and your wrist is not twisted, then you're going to significantly reduce the amount of stress you feel when typing. My wife uses an ergonomic keyboard. Her body's different than mine, right? But I just use a regular straight keyboard. It works for me. Works for me. All right. All right. So then they have to go back and for this, for this little sequence, Victoria comes up with a whole plan. Based on her book learning. And are immediately caught. Except for Ethelready. Paying attention. He runs in. With a foolhardy cry, kills the witch with a sword. Yeah. Alfred's father, we need a name for him, right? So as we come up with characters, you come up with names, right? So what's Alfred's father's name? Maybe it's, I don't know who Alfred, we can just call him Pepin. We'll give him a Carolingian name. Pepin the Short. And then we can name the witch something like I don't know. I don't know. You come up with a witch's name. I'm not going to come up with one right now. Think of an evil... What's the most evil girl's name? We're just going to call her Amber. The witch. Baby mama. So if you could use it to subvert those expectations, result. Okay, what is this? Should there be a level of anticipation or predictability within the dangerous sequence since one of the characters is creating this pattern of getting into conflicts? I don't know. You can use that or not. You can use it or not. I think setting up, playing with expectations is where you get people to have fun and be surprised. So if they have an expectation that characters are going to do something and then that works or it doesn't work and they do something else, that can be a really fun twist, right? I'm going to add a little thing here, which is like Alfred refuses to kill his father. And what's his name? Who he is. They did, in fact, lose the things they gave up. Pepin did lose his kingdom. You know, by restoring the king, Alfred lost his chance to get with Victoria, right? We got some irony here at the end. And Athelred never realized that the money he had was not enough to buy a horse and armor. So then you have to have like a resolution, right? So now that they've saved his father, they have to go back and try to save his mother. So it would have to be like, you know, the resolution would be normal. You know, they go back, confront Edward. Maybe Pepin has to kill him, etc. Then it'd be, you know, they use the water, you know, the enchanted water. And she wakes up. And then, if you want a happy ending, it would be like Pepin gives Athelred a horse and armor. He makes Alfred king. You know, whatever. You can come up with that solution. So anyway, this is like a basic kind of outline for what we want. Since we have, we're only at like 3 pages here, not even 3 pages. We can have, put this in parentheses, other adventures where they acquire wealth and follow Pepin's trail. Put that in, make the heading 2. There we go. Be a final act. This would be the resolution. Boom. And that's it. Okay. So once you have like a basic outline And you could spend more hours like writing additional adventures that you come up with. Each one you would ideally take a chapter to write it. So like 5,000 to 10,000 words for each adventure would be good. So you can view each adventure like a short story that contributes to this overall goal here. And then eventually, yeah, we get to where we save Alfred's father, go back, you know. Maybe he doesn't make Alfred king. Maybe Alfred gets to marry Victoria anyway. You know. How do you come up with the plot points and character interactions so quickly? I don't know. They just come to me. I'm showing you how to do it so that it can come to you too. If you wish upon a star. I can already hear the woke harpy screeching about how this resolution. He saves his father and kingdom and forgoes the crazy girl. Well, the crazy girl has captured him. I like that as an element. I actually had that in Water of Awakening. That was one of the surprise elements towards the end. So I'd be reusing. You know, this is always a thing with me. Is I'm like, I don't want to reuse like the good twists that I had in previous books because that's kind of boring. You know, that's not very fun. But this would be like a good little fantasy story, fairy tale style fantasy story. I would totally write something like this. You know, maybe I will write it. We could do this as the live write. It's a fun little fairy tale. Depending on the style that you want to execute it, you could actually do it in a lot shorter space than one of my regular books where there's just lots of prose and there's lots of dialogue. You just, you kind of stick to actions and descriptions. Whoa, there goes my camera. There you go. I don't have I need maybe just the separate little mount for this thing. It just doesn't like to stay put very, very well at all. Anyway, so yeah, you could come up with maybe let's think of like 3 or 4 adventures is what I would add to this. If I wrote it in the style of like Garamesh, then it would be... You could probably execute the book even with the adventures in... If you think, you know, this is chapter 1 and this is chapter 2-ish, the transition. And then chapter 3. And then chapter 4. And let's do 5, 6, 7. Chapter 8 and 9. Chapter 10, if you did in 10 chapters, you could write in 50,000 words. If you used a very storybooky style. 50,000 words is nothing to turn your nose up at, but it's certainly well short of what I tend to write stories like this in, which is over 100,000 words. Do you know how it ends? If so, I would choose the most efficient route unless you want to stretch it. So there's efficiency and then there's efficiency. The point of these adventures is to learn some moral stories, right? So in Garamesh and the Farmer, if I was going to be 100% efficient, I wouldn't have had all these tasks. It would just be like one task. But that'd be boring. And that wouldn't teach the moral lessons that the format kind of asks us to learn about, right? It's okay for this to be, if I add an adventure that gets Victoria to love Alfred back or makes Alfred really fall in love with Victoria. So if we had other adventures, we would want one that's like, you know, Alfred falls for Victoria because of something that she does. And then Victoria falls for Alfred. And then we'd have one more that is Alpha already gets some money. Right? So all of these things. Yeah. For me, figuring out such elements is slow, and I get stuck agonizing over which of many options is best at each point. Yeah, but what's cool about the planning phase is that, once it's planned, then you can just do it. You can always go back and change it. If it's like, man, I just really wish I'd done it this way, so you can change it. Has some Don Quixote themes because of Victoria's level of delusion. Yeah, I like that. That's a great point. Yeah, I would say that's partly, to me, yeah, if we're taking two elements of Don Quixote and putting them in two characters, the foolhardiness and then the naivete. So Victoria, because she's kind of a shut-in and her parents kind of keep her from doing stuff, she's very naive about the realities of the world. Whereas Athelredi is not naive, he's merely foolhardy. He wants to be a brave knight. That's who he sees himself as. So he's going to get himself into trouble trying to solve problems with his sword, right? Trying to solve problems by force, trying to be brave and chivalrous. He's going to fall on his face. So you're going to have elements of that. And that is to me, that's part of Don Quixote. He has a self ethos of chivalry, pride, and daring and bravery that ends up him being foolhardy instead of being merely brave. Alfred would do something out of the book in his character. This would arouse Victoria in attraction. That's a great idea, actually. For Victoria to fall for Alfred, it has to be something like he does something that really would entice her. Like he would be less street smart and more foolhardy, or just like do some kind of big gesture that would really make her like fall in love with him. Like she wants to go on the adventure and he lets her. And he doesn't stop her and he backs her up the whole time. Yeah, that would be a good one, I think. I think you're right. All of these little ideas, this is like part of the planning phase for a good book. And you as an author can toy with these ideas and play with them. Like, I imagine this character would do something like this. And I'm just making this stuff up as, here and like talking to y'all and having fun with it. You can do this on your own, or you can spitball it with a friend or a family member. It's like, here's my idea. I have this idea of this. And like, oh, what if this happened? People are really pretty happy to want to participate in creative work with you because they just love to think about those kinds of ideas. Like what? They have an idea maybe in their head like, oh, I know what Alfred's like. Alfred is very reserved. Alfred has to break out of his shell maybe. And so Alfred breaks out of his shell, and that's what gets Victoria really interested in him. Victoria is very, maybe she's very naive, but she's also really passionate. And that's something that makes Alfred just like really fall in love with her, Yeah, Alfred would be more gutsy than intellect, not appealing to rationality. He'd drop a sword to save her, yeah. Something like that. Something that would be out of character. Those are good. How often should you try to subvert the reader's expectations? Well, here's the thing about, quote, subverting expectations. You have to have expectations to begin with. So where do those expectations come from? If you are writing in genre fiction, there's a set of expectations that go with the tropes of the genre. So playing with the tropes of the genre is one way to subvert expectations. If we're talking about within the plot, within the event sequence of a book, you have to establish a pattern of action for readers to have an expectation for how conflicts are going to resolve and what characters are going to do in what place or for what part of the story. Then you have them do something different. You have something else happen that is different from what you've established. So you have to establish a pattern. So within the book, you have to have a pattern of things. You have to have some kind of pattern that creates those expectations. Then you have to step outside that pattern. And the more fun and clever you do with that, kind of stepping outside the pattern, the more interested the reader is going to be. And you're always playing with reader expectations in a couple of different ways. So you want a story that has a lot of tension. That means that there are things that aren't resolved. But if there's infinite tension, if you never resolve anything, readers will actually become uncomfortable and want to like close the book or turn off the TV show or whatever it's going to be. Yeah, Alfred would do something out of a book. Yeah. Or Alfred would actually read one of her books, is what I would probably have this. You know. You know, it would be something that she really likes. Yeah. So Athelred could take up the sword and turn on them both. Why would he do that? He has no claim to the kingship. He has no reason for him to kill them. He wouldn't do that. Subverting expectations would be like Athelred always charges in and gets his butt kicked. So one time he doesn't do that. Or like what I had here, he does that and it actually works. That's the subversion of expectations. That's the fun twist. Okay? He has a pattern and then we break the pattern, not necessarily by him doing something different, like learning a lesson, but by him just being himself, being Don Quixote, and it works. It just happens to work that time. You know, that's a subversion of expectations, quote subversion. It's really just you have to have a pattern. The pattern can be from the genre itself before someone buys the book and you do something that's different from that pattern. Or it can be a pattern you establish in the book and then you break that pattern somehow. The character does something different that they wouldn't normally do. Or the character does the same thing that doesn't work, but this time it works. That sort of thing. You know what I mean? He has to either read one or be familiar with one of her stories. She has to also know he pulled an idea from one of her books upon seeing him do it. Yeah. So yeah, maybe he's familiar with one of the stories. Like they come upon something and she's like, I know this. This is from this book. And Alfred actually knows that. And he's like, okay. And so he uses that to like solve the problem, right? You can come up with something good there. Yeah. Athelred, measurement of success can have a material metric by how much coin he got or valuable item. Yeah, his metric for success is getting money. So he has to leave all his money behind in order to... Maybe when he leaves his money behind, instead of just leaving it at the cave, he like throws it into a pit and he can never get it back. He's like, you got the sword back, you got love back, but I didn't get my money back. I'll never have my money. I'll always be poor. Right? That would be a really funny twist to me. That's how I would do it. And then, of course, what happens is Pepin at the end gifts him a set of armor and a horse so that he can be a knight. On the condition that he is a knight in service to his son, Alfred. I'm dying. Wasn't expecting this. Now our notification sent, David. Sorry. Yeah. And you can do this within adventures. A lot of development happens with dialogue. So you won't see a lot of the character development until you start writing and doing the actual drafting process. And then it's like, oh yeah, we're going to have Alfred and Victoria having banter and then, blah. A good model for something like this would actually be Taran and Eilonwy from... the Prydain books, like Black Cauldron. There's a Disney movie that's Black Cauldron, but it's based on this series by Lloyd Alexander. Has a great kind of mashup between the princess who's a daughter of an evil witch, Eilonwy, and then Taran, who ends up being the rightful king of Prydain. Right? It's a good setup, good fairy tale setup. Yeah. All right, we're starting to run out of time for this week. But I think I accomplished something good, talked about planning. It all comes back to this. And as you kind of come up with more characters, you just fill in your character sheet, right? And when you're drafting, if you want to put a character in, you go back to your character sheet, just write that character in for later. Any kind of goals that you have for the conflicts you can put here. And then you have your event sequence. And so then you go page 1. Alfred was this kid. His mother was very sick. One day in spring, Alfred's father disappeared into the mists in the east. Over the Fields, we know, right? If we want to do like something more like Lord Dunsany, you can do something like that. There's so many ways you can execute this and make it just so fun. Maybe I'll write this book, but I don't know. If you want to rip this off and do your own book with your own ideas for some of the stuff I talked about, you are welcome to do it. It's all about execution, and that's the other thing too. Is like a lot. If you're kind of new, you start to think, oh, this is where I'm making up a story. It really comes down to execution, like how you actually draft the words. This stuff is not, to me, this is like, oh, this is all cheesy stuff that I can just come up with at a whim. Because I've read lots of books that are like this. And I'm just kind of like, I'm synthesizing, I'm just mixing stuff in. It won't, but like when I write it, you'll be like, okay, that's definitely one of his books, because I have a style when I write. I have a way that I write things. Not just the plot or the characters, but the way I write dialogue, the way I write prose. All that stuff would be in the book. Right, all that stuff would be there. So maybe I'll do this for the next sequence of live writes, or maybe we'll do a short thing like Live in the Pod, Eat Bugs Part 2, and then we'll maybe we'll do this. You know, if people like a fantasy fairy tale story with some love and stuff like this, it would probably be quite a bit longer. So I'd have to be a lot more consistent with doing the live write. But you can get the idea. My guess would be if I wrote it with a very condensed style, a very compressed style, I could probably do it in 50,000 words. If we're doing one of my more decompressed styles, if we're writing it like this, 100,000 words. Probably. Maybe, you know what? Probably not that many. If we stick it to if we do 4 adventures, 3 or 4 adventures, then maybe you can do it in 90,000 words, which is a good length. This one's 115 or so thousand words. I'm trying to think how many adventures are in this one, because it's an Odyssey format. You know, there's like, 1, 2, kind of 3, 4, probably 5, 6, 7, 8. The 8th one's really long. There's 10 adventures. There's like 10 big areas. Even though there's 20 chapters, some of them take multiple chapters to get through that plot area. So, yeah, pretty fun story. I can use a lot of humorous devices in this story. It's a pretty fun story. Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for humor. And comic relief, I think, it's important, right? It's important to have a little bit of humor in what you're doing so that we don't feel like the mood is completely serious all the time. I've written books with like no comic relief before. And I don't know, they tend to have a much different flavor. Even Dostoevsky uses comic relief. Even Dostoevsky uses comic relief. He actually uses it quite a bit. And it's important because there's such a dour mood, to like Brothers Karamazov. You have to lighten it at points. Even something that's like Stark, he was sentimental. He was evil and sentimental. There's a humorous element to that statement, but it's a dark statement, Athelready is a trope of how far would you go for materialistic gain? Yes. How far would you take it? How bad do you need the money? Yeah, so I like all this stuff. Anyway, I think that's about it for today. It's 8:20 of my time. I need to eat and get the kids to bed and stuff. But thanks for coming and hanging out with me. I appreciate the super chats. I really do. And yeah, maybe we'll write this. And it'll be fun. You can just kind of change stuff up as you write the draft. Or maybe someone got inspired by this. Is like, I have a different idea for this sort of setup. It's going to be a different kind of thing. And then you can do your own thing with it. To me, it's not, because everything in this outline, I think someone has done before. And I think I've seen someone do it before. Or I've done it. So it's not, I'm not like pursuing originality with this. The originality will come with the execution. The originality will come with the execution. And this would make like a great little fantasy game, you know. Make it a visual novel. So write a visual novel with it. Be fun. A fairy tale visual novel. Choose your own adventure. Yeah. That'd be another thing to plan, would be like a visual novel. It'd be very different because if you want to have multiple endings, you have to kind of choose how that's going to be executed. You know. So anyway, thanks so much, folks. I'll see you all next time. Thanks for hanging out with me. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Of course, you can hop on my Patreon. Patreon.com/DavidVStewart. You get a free book every month. I don't have this month's free book out yet, but it will be out. I'll catch you next time, George. What's the difference between Eddie Van Halen and Jimi Hendrix? I don't know. What else? Or Ko-Fi, right? You could get the books on Ko-Fi if you want. You can support me there, or you can support me on Substack and get copies of all the stuff. I'll put a copy of this up on every site. So if you want a paper copy of what we did tonight, I'll just make an article of it. It looks like crap because it's just like a spitballing idea document, but you get an idea of what we came up with at the end here, like what I did. So this is pretty much what I do to plan a book, and then I just start drafting and come up with that. If I have other things come into my mind as I'm writing it, then I just do those things, and I feel free to do those things because it's my book and I can do whatever the hell I want. So that always feels good to me. Now I'll link my Substack too. I usually put out 1 to 2 articles a week on the Substack as well, so you can get content that way. It's a different kind of content usually, a little more serious. So anyway, thanks so much, folks. I will see you all next time, and have a great day.